It's a good, warm, fuzzy commercial to start our session. All right, so I have Laura Andrews, one of my non-annoying coworkers, joining me. So what we'd like to do is, I'm going to talk about this idea, is it wrong to care about appearance, but then we also want to welcome Q&A. You guys have sent some in, but please feel free to raise your hand, because we really want to make sure we walk away being practical and helpful. And there are so many things that can be said about this topic that probably will be left unsaid today. So that's the time Q&A can really be helpful. So at any point, feel free to raise your hand and engage with us. So that leads us to ask the question, is it wrong to care about appearance? And here's what I say, that all beauty acts as a mirror and is meant to point back to the Creator. So I love this idea. Any of you guys ever watch Blue Planet or the Planet series or Life? At least nod and act like you know what I'm talking about to make me feel better. These are like documentaries, and they go into the ocean and they do this whole series of the ocean, or they go into West Africa and talk about the lions. What's so cool though is it's nature up close and personal. And I can't help but think, how can people not believe in a creator when you watch these series? The level of intricacy in bugs, and I'm not a bug person. I do not particularly enjoy bugs. But the level of how they're wired, how they engage, how they work in community, and how they naturally know to navigate the world around them, to under the sea and all the creatures. And it shows you that we have a very creative God who is not colorless and lifeless. And so how do we think? One of the ways I think we think is, beauty's a good thing. Here's the thing, though. Beauty should always point back to the Creator of all that is beautiful, right? So let's think this through for a minute. The extremes that I often see people struggle with are, first, maybe the Stoic view. So especially as Christians I see struggle with talking about beauty or attractiveness or appearance as seen as evil. Anything that draws attention to appearance is wrong, therefore I must refrain of anything that brings attention to me or my appearance. And again, feel free to ask questions. What does this do? Well, I'd argue it produces a legalism that defines me, limits me, and judges me harshly by my external appearance and behavior as well. So it requires a mundane, colorless expression of life towards life. So what do I mean by that? It's very fascinating that people that choose to live kind of this mundane, colorless life, thinking dress, makeup, whatever it might be, is wrong. And I'm not arguing preference. I'm arguing saying it's morally wrong or it's sinful. Whatever language, there's the whole continuum, right? Whatever language you have, is arguing, again, that by being mundane, by being colorless, by being plain, that I'm somehow more godly before the Lord. That makes sense to everybody? And what are we doing there then? What we're doing is the very same thing that culture can do, and that's by saying we're defined by our outward appearance. So even a mundane, colorless expression is saying the way I look on the outside defines my level of spirituality or godliness. So that Stoic view is still wrongly putting emphasis on appearance at all as worth or as value in some degree. Then you have what we see a lot of, especially in our young people, right? And that's an unexamined acceptance. I don't really know if it's wrong to be attractive. I don't think it's wrong to want to be attractive. Therefore, what? Therefore, I begin to accept some of the values that the world has to offer. I embrace things. I embrace cultural ideas. I believe that somehow youth, beauty, accomplishments, or success are meant to be measures of worth externally or internally. Now, the hard thing about this, too, is there some level of truth culturally, and research demonstrates this, that who are the people that tend to get the jobs? And if there is an attractive or unattractive person, does that attractive person have a higher chance of getting that job? Or successful, or credentials, right? The school you come from, the credentials you have behind your name somehow mean you are the preferred candidate. And when do you and I have to wrestle with the fact we do live in a world that measures each other by these things? And how do we live in a world but not be altered by it? So I desire to be successful, good at my Christian life, my ministry, family, and personal appearance. What's wrong with that? And here's where I think in the church we accept this far too much too. That there are tendencies towards saying a particular parenting style, a particular ministry or personality style, a particular way of living life is preferred, and not only preferred, but we measure each other by those things. We measure each other as less than or better than by those things. So what's another way of thinking about this? Let me throw out a couple of points. All creation is meant to be reflective of God's glory and beauty. My neck doesn't crank that high. And beauty and appearance and action. So creation is meant to be a reflection of the Creator. Then it only makes sense that that's true for you and I as well, that we are meant to be a reflection of creation, and the Creator, I mean. All beauty is meant to point back to the Creator. The Bible acknowledges God's sovereignty, goodness, and creative liberty in each individual. So I recently wrote a book on parenting, and actually this is one of the primary points of it, not to self-promote the book, but to say there's something really important about stepping outside our desire search for formulas as our way of knowing we're okay before the Lord or okay in the church. There's something about going right before the Lord and saying, give me the freedom to be who you created me to be. Let me be another part of your creation that speaks to your creative liberty and the freedom you've given for self-expression. So one limits, the other liberates. I live by a new law that loves God and others. So this altruistic attitude versus self-promotion, how do I make sure I'm acceptable, I'm meeting with whatever the standards are around me, versus I just truly live my life as an expression of creative liberty before my Creator. Acceptance is found within relationship, not public image. Again, we're all about public image, right? So here's where social media comes in. Here's where we use people who are in the public eye as a validation for where our worth can come from. Beauty is redefined by integrity and disposition, not an external facade we put on. When we accept this, we find we're given tremendous liberty in outward expression, not confinement. So again, if I think God can give the world of bugs so many different species and weird looks and interesting facts and weird things about them, then why all of a sudden do we all have to be the same? Why do we all have to look and act and perform and dress and appear the same way? Why is there not equally as much liberty in our self-expression, knowing that at the end of the day we do it because it points back to the Creator? So this is some of the questions you guys brought up. Rightfully so, is when can I enjoy my appearance? When can I enjoy dressing up or clothes or fashion or makeup or things like that? And when does it become a dangerous thing? And one way of answering that is the degree to which we put our value in it, right? That when I enjoy something just because I'm living out of who God created me to be, or just because it's fun and it's an expression and it points back to who I am before the Lord, then we're drawing people to Christ. It's demonstrating the creation and the Creator in ways that give glory to Him, not that are about self-promotion and self-absorption. So what does it look like then to live life that way? So this Peter passage can often be used in the wrong way, right? It says, and let not your adornment be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry, putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in God's sight. So let me stop there, and Laura and I are going to engage with this for a while. So piety is not a dress, but a life. This leads into even issues of modesty, right, and what are cultural for us. Oh, there's the spotlight. So some of the questions we got were going back to what does it look like to have freedom in our appearance? This is my language, so here's where you guys can weigh in and feel free to raise your hands. But where are we given liberty, and where does that begin to maybe to enslave us? Is that a good way to say it? Mm-hmm. So, do you want to take a crack at it before I keep talking?
I'm happy with you to keep talking.
That's what I was afraid of.
Well, would you like me to jump into some questions that kind of tap into this?
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
There's two questions. This got into, how other people might perceive us, particularly like a spouse or someone in a romantic relationship. I'm going to read two of them that are pretty similar. How ought we account for the perspectives of appearance that our spouses might have? And then the other one is, how should we biblically take into account physical image within the context of how it impacts our marriage? And oh, no, that was the wrong one. Sorry. How would you deal with your emotions and respond to your spouse if they said a negative comment about your appearance or natural quality? So this is where we started to think about, where is appearance foundational to being loved and accepted by another person versus where do you have liberty to think about your appearance or other people's preferences about your appearance. So Julie, you want to jump into that?
Yeah, so those of you that asked that question, we have to guess what you're up against. So hopefully we'll start hitting on some of those themes. I think there's a distinction between preferences and expectations, right, in relationships, or preferences and ultimatums. So as spouses, those who are married or in relationships, there are personal preferences of what's attractive, dress, appearance, things like that we all are given preferences. And when, especially in a healthy relationship, can you express your preferences? And there's a delight to be appealing to the other person. There's a delight to want to give delight to somebody else. But there's a fine line between that and this desire to find approval from a spouse in and through the way I present my appearance, that there should never be an expectation that to be loved, I must do this thing, right? Because we're called to love without an expectation of return, that we don't give to get, that we don't do things in order to have people love us. So I can keep rambling, so I'm going to let Laura jump in here in a minute too. Without knowing the specifics, we are always trying to engage with, when I know my spouse would like it if I dressed a certain way or wore my hair a certain way. Maybe I have a spouse that doesn't want me to wear makeup, but I like wearing makeup. What if I like wearing makeup, but I have a spouse that doesn't like the makeup? When is there liberty to say, all right, out of love and because I know he enjoys it, I will do this, versus I feel I will not be accepted or loved if I don't do this. That makes sense to everybody? You want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll throw in part of our conversation over lunch. When we read these questions, of course, as counselors, we always want to know, what's the specific context? What situation is this coming out of? And so one of our questions is, when is a spouse presenting maybe a negative, comment about maybe his wife's appearance? I thought of a couple different possible scenarios. One might be in a conflict where maybe a husband says it to hurt his wife or to punish his wife. Another might be one where a husband is kind of constantly hinting at or making comments of like, you really should do this, or you should dress this way. So he's obviously trying to influence his wife's decisions. Another one, which I've actually heard is fairly common, is that wives will struggle with insecurity and they'll ask their husband to comment about something like, do I look okay in this? And then finally, the husband will say, well, fine, yes, you do look better when you wear this other outfit, or I do like your hair better when you wear it this way. So I do think that the context matters when thinking about this question, but I love how you brought up love and thinking about loving the other person. We have to remember that our spouses are not these authoritative, objective judges, that they are struggling with the same, worldly temptations that we're struggling with. And in that moment, loving the other person doesn't necessarily mean just accepting what they're saying or bending to what they're saying. But loving means grappling with what God says about us, and also sharing that and promoting that to the other person. And so, yeah, we do have liberty to delight the other person with our appearance, but at the end of the day, that's not what's foundational to our relationship or our value to the other person.
Yeah, this is a little off topic, but in my home, I have this quote by St. Augustine, and it says, "Love God and do as you please." And I love it. It's just like this big, but it's so compelling to me because of this. Love God and do as you please does not mean I get a free pass to do whatever I want and everybody's got to deal with it, right? What it means is when I love the Lord, every extension of my life pours forth from that. It flows out of that. The way I express myself, excuse me, what I do for a living, the conversations I have, I will always do it with a desire to love God in the way I conduct myself. And I think, quite honestly, similarly, in good relationships or in relationships with family and spouse and our children, that if I love them, everything I do is going to be out of love. Even the decisions to not do something. If I know something will make my spouse happy, then I choose to do it out of delight to love well, not because I fear acceptance or lack of acceptance from it. If I do things for my children, it's not because I hope they will love me more or they won't be mad at me. It is an expression of living out because love propels me to do what I do. Fear doesn't. And that would be another thing that I think came out of the emotions question, that when a spouse or somebody close to you has strong opinions about your appearance or your decisions or your conduct, and it is painful. And I think it's okay to say it's painful because you're sensing there's some level of not being accepted or being rejected or not being good enough in their eyes because of your appearance. And I think there's something right and good about even pointing that out, to say, this feels like you're judging me less than by not doing this thing. And even naming that and putting it to words is helpful for you sometimes, even more than your spouse. I think it's helpful for our spouse, but it could be also helpful for you to say, I've got to choose not to buy into this, even though my spouse might be. The hard thing, I would presume, is when I think it's something I could potentially change to make my spouse happy. And why would I or why wouldn't I? And I think what we're trying to tap into is this idea that, am I doing it for the approval of man? Am I doing it to be loved or more accepted? Or am I doing it because it really is an act of love and care and preference? And that's so tricky, right? Because nobody knows but you on your motive for doing it.
Yeah. I think that'll tap into a question that somebody else asked about how do you prioritize being healthy, having an appearance? How do you even respond to others who maybe use scripture to promote that? Just the idea of stewardship is huge when you think about appearance, whether it's taking care of your body, eating healthy, exercising, or even the idea of how much do you invest in your appearance, how much time, how much money, how much thought. Those all kind of go into this wisdom category of, God has given you limitations or a limited amount of resources and time, and how are you going to invest that to honor him? And that might mean that you limit how much you work on your appearance or how much you address appearance issues or accommodate your spouse. So there's no black and white answer. It's always okay, what is God calling you to do with what he's given you? And there is flexibility in that category.
Yeah, so let's talk that out for a minute. So one thing that comes to mind is exercise, right? Exercise is a healthy thing to do. We can all argue why the world needs to exercise more. But is there also a sense where you and I can become addicted to exercise, or where we're finding value and worth in exercise in unhealthy ways, but yet we're doing it under the guise of good stewardship, or I need to be healthy. So What would I look for? Well, it goes back to the degree to which it dictates my worth, the degree to which it impedes my day-to-day activities or it shapes my day-to-day activities. So maybe I love to go jogging and I jog regularly and I want to do more cross-country running and it's a hobby of mine. I always have to be asking, especially if you are have other responsibilities or a family, to what degree does this hobby or this good quality in me start to impede upon other people's lives, start to impede upon relationships? And again, that's tricky, right? But those are the questions you're asking yourself to really live honestly about when does this shape my life too much and it's harmful? When is it just a part of how God wired me to be? I've been reading some of the biography of Eric Liddell in Chariots of Fire, and so this is in my head where here you have a man who was made fast. And he used this language, and he really did run for God's pleasure. And he talks about that. When I run, I feel God's pleasure. And I was just listening to, or reading, I forget, listening to a reading, something about his sister, and his sister was interviewed saying, the one thing that really got missed in the movie of Chariots of Fire is probably in only one scene they show him jogging or running like a wild man. And his arms would go flailing and his head would be up in the air and he just looked like a madman. And not to mention it wasn't really good technique for running. But she said the reason he did that, it was an act of worship. That every time he ran like that with his head up to the skies, to the Lord. And you look at that and you go, wow, that man, Eric Liddell probably spent a lot of time investing in running and jogging, but it was rightly ordered. And what he did, there's a great example of it was an expression of worship to the Lord, that people could see that in the way he talked about it, in the way he engaged, in the decisions he made, which is why his story was so popular. And so those are some of the ways we're trying to think about how can liberty of self-expression be a real act of worship. So there's issues of stewardship that Laura brought up, like how do we steward our time, our money, our resources, our appearance? When is there just liberty in ways other people might find liberty to be gardening or doing something else that to them is an act of worship? So there's all kinds of ways of, say, there's self-expression that is beautiful. People make stained glass art or pottery, people that like to grow things in the dirt. All these things are acts of worship when they point back to the Creator. But when they point to me, then I've got to start worrying about what's the danger in it. Mm-hmm. Do you add anything to that?
Maybe I'll read one of the questions just to maybe round out the conversation. I've often heard Christians use the Bible to endorse a healthy lifestyle, healthy, clean eating and exercise. For instance, people use 1 Corinthians 6, your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, which is more about sexual sin, so it seems misapplied. Is there any biblical wisdom to support looking after our bodies and living a healthy lifestyle? So maybe the only thing I would add to that is just this idea that we are, I actually wish I had like a particular verse that I could point to, but I just feel like all of Scripture points to the fact that our lives belong to God, and part of responding to that reality is taking care of what God has given us and looking to do what we do in a sustainable way. Obviously, we can't sustain our own life. We're not even going to live, at one point we're going to die, we're going to break down, we're going to age. But with what God has given us, are we taking care of ourselves as people who belong to God so that our ministry can be sustained? So I think that's where healthy living really comes into play there, that if God calls us to love our neighbor, part of how we do that is by sleeping and eating and taking care of ourselves so that we can love our neighbor tomorrow. Anything else you want to say to that, Julie?
Yeah, the best word I think we keep coming back around to is the stewardship principle. What's it like to steward what God has given us well? Engaging that really by, is it a desire to serve Him? Who's it reflecting back on? Mm-hmm. There's something else you just said in that I just lost it. All right, it'll come back to me.
Okay.
Next question?
Yeah. Here's two questions that we feel like paired well together. Just about the connection between appearance and like sexual temptation in marriage, particularly when a spouse, we'll just use a husband in this example. A husband has a pornography addiction or is drawn to other women and their appearance. How does that reflect on our appearance as wives? So the first question is, how do we help women heal who are or have been in a relationship where trust has been broken because of pornography? How do we restore a godly self-image? And then the other question is, how should we biblically take into account physical image within the context of how it impacts our marriages and sexual life and husbands' sexual temptations, for example, pornography, etc.?
I'm going to bounce that to you.
Into that?
Yeah.
Too hard.
Yeah.
I know. I think when Julie and I read this, we're like, oh. Well, I think it's funny whenever I hear, I'll just speak to my own counseling context, and even my friendships. People will come in and say, my spouse has this pornography addiction, and when I press him on it, either he'll say this, or I wonder if I change my appearance to be more attractive to him, then maybe he wouldn't be drawn to pornography or be drawn to possibly be unfaithful in our marriage. And I just think that's simplifying the situation way too much, and probably isn't actually addressing the real problem behind pornography addiction. I might pass this to you, Julie, and actually have you fill this out, because I know we're on the same page about this. But maybe just for starters, changing your appearance is not actually going to address the problem in a husband's heart. That's where the problem actually lies. And it can be a temptation for a wife to go along with the lie that the problem really comes down to physical or sexual attraction. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, we know that the issue of lust is far more than that, and both your spouse and you will be believing a lie if you believe that you changing your appearance will resolve a lust issue in somebody's heart. And that would be true of me if it were my spouse, that if I'm coveting after something else, then that's really a reflection of what's going on in me, not my family, my spouse, the world around me. We make those connections because I think our tendency is to believe that it's a physical appearance related issue, or buying into a lie that is what gives us comfort and hope. And so when another person is buying into that lie, then it just reaffirms the need to change in our own insecurities. And so the more we find refuge and stability, I'm trying to choose my words carefully because I don't want to just use the words self-esteem or confidence. So I think the more confidence we have in who God made us to be, the more we can stand on our own and say, this is who I am before this person. And they will choose to embrace it or not embrace it. And I must be loving. I must be moving towards this person, but that does not mean I have to alter myself to be something that I'm not required or can't potentially be. But it's I don't want to oversimplify it. I think that is the foundation of it. I don't want to oversimplify it. I mean, we want to think of a younger generation struggling with this, but all of us know that aging is hard. And what does it mean to care about your appearance, to even be affected by things changing in you, but without it altering your identity and who you are as well? And that might always be a struggle up and down, or just something that you're measuring. And then what do you do when the people around you are struggling with that? So I can think of a situation where there was a couple, as the woman got older, her body started changing. She gained a little bit of weight. She wasn't as fit. And her spouse commented on it. Not unhealthy, not letting herself go. It's just a natural progression of the aging process. Another example was her vision was getting worse. She used to wear contacts, and just out of convenience and the difficulty of night vision, decided to start wearing her glasses. Her husband commented on that. As she started to get older and the gray hairs started to come out, the next comment was, well, you are going to color your hair, right? And here was her struggle. Her struggle was a very honest, genuine to say, I'm okay. I'm okay with this aging process. I'm okay these things are changing. I think I am still taking care of my body. I'm not letting it go. It is just naturally the way life is moving. I'm outwardly wasting away, right? But yet my spouse is having a hard time embracing that. What do I do with that? And to what degree should I change these things because it will make him happy? Well, that's a great question to wrestle with. And I really would not choose to be simplistic of it, but let's talk through what the principles would be. One might be her motive. So if your motive is to get your spouse to love you more or to find you more attractive, is that a helpful motive? Maybe to be more attractive to my spouse isn't a bad motive, but if it's because I feel like I'll have his affirmation, his love, his attention, if I fear he'll have a wandering eye because I don't, kind of dangerous territory to be on. If I do it because I just know it makes my husband happy and I could care less, so I'll dye my hair, what do I care? Makes him happy, I'll do it. And there's no value or worth attached to it at all. I could have utter liberty to do it. Now, the flip side might also be his motive, right? If his motive is he wants an attractive wife hanging on his arm and he's perceiving an unattractive wife hanging on his arm, do I care about what's motivating his heart to want those things? I do. And that's where I think it can get tricky, right? To say, how do I engage my spouse with maybe what his motives are, whether I feel the freedom to change or not change? Do you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Maybe I'll say one thing. What I've learned over the years in talking about appearance with folks is appearance often symbolizes things. So it's interesting how there may be lots of ways in which we can improve our appearance, but we might, single out one particular thing, like we saw in the video with the women describing themselves. And it's just helpful to step back and as opposed to just thinking that we're being objective judges, to ask, like, what does that particular thing mean to me, or what does it represent? So even if a spouse comments on, your hair color, it's just good for us to say inside, like, what does that mean to you if my hair is this color as opposed to this color? Because obviously as you age, you can't address everything, but sometimes we'll just single out one thing that if I can get this right or if I can correct this thing, I'm okay. And obviously we're putting way too much weight on that one thing. And it's just helpful to recognize that that's actually what we do in all day-to-day life. We know we can't fix everything, so we'll just kind of single out something that seems attainable or that represents something important. And it's just good to step back and say, what weight does this really carry for me, or what weight might this carry for my spouse? And just recognize that it probably can't actually carry that weight.
Yeah, my guess would be in the back of all of our minds or hearts would be this nagging thought of, what if he's right? Or what if she is right? When we hear somebody make a critique on us and to think, what if they're right? And that strikes fear in us. What if I'm less than? What if I'm enough? What if I'm not attractive? What if I'm not successful enough? And I think actually facing that, putting that before me and go, well, what if it is? And learning to say, I can still be okay. Where is value found? That we are not defined by the stars and dots people put in our lives. So if any of you guys have sat through my counseling children class, I like to use the book by Max Lucado called You Are Special. And it's all about these wooden people that go around sticking stars and dots on each other. And that we use those things to define ourselves as being okay. And what does it look like to find pleasure before the one with whom we are pleased and with whom is pleased with us? And that is the only thing that really can give us worth, and how quickly we want to run amok, or we want other people to affirm whether that's true of us or not. And I think that's probably the constant battle. Before we move on to the next questions, does anybody want to comment or ask questions about that? Now's your time to chat. Yeah.
Is it an unavoidable thing if your husband is attracted to other women?
Is it?
As a matter of fact that you have to accept it as a common sense that men will be attracted to vaccine, and it's not something
So is it?
realized you would not have this problem, or it's a thing that you will have this problem for sure if you get married in a marriage relationship?
So
Is it unavoidable that your spouse will be attracted to?
is it unavoidable my
people?
spouse will be attracted to other women? Not if I poke his eyes out, he won't be. I shouldn't say that on camera. My gosh, you just gave me a hot one. No, I don't think we should assume our husbands are all going to struggle with lust, right? What an awful message to say. However, to say we live in a world with temptation is fair, right? And how we handle that. And there are really strong opinions probably on how wives and husbands handle that. And I want to avoid somehow weighing in on that. But I think even our tendency to handle those things, temptations of the heart, are to think making outward boundaries and outward rules will somehow change the heart. And I don't believe that. I believe is when each spouse is committing their hearts, their souls, their minds, their thought life to the Lord, that our hope is found. Not that boundaries are wrong, not that setting up things that qualify or call us to live above reproach, but I think how quickly we use, again, outward, external boundaries to define that. And that's not helpful to do. So I want to embrace the fact that we live in a very image-conscious world that is actively pursuing people to lust. And even as women, us lusting after certain images in our own hearts, whether we want to be like them or admire them, I think it's a human nature problem, not just a spousal problem. Anybody else? Yeah.
Being kind of on the other side of that, being a single woman and getting older, and if you're looking to date and you see someone who I struggle with, everybody is beautiful because he's made in God's image, and I may meet a nice guy, a nice godly man. I'm not at all attracted to him. Is that bad? Because I should find him beautiful because he was made in the image of God?
Right. So if I'm not attracted to a man who's single, is there something wrong with me?
Just say he's a good Christian.
Yeah, he's a good Christian.
You know that your family or friends said, this is a good man. But you just, no.
Just nothing there.
I still, I think that's, I need to get over that. I need to find something attractive. Is it terrible that I don't find anything attractive?
Well, if somebody were dating me and they were working really hard to try to find something attractive about me, I'm not sure how encouraging that would be to me either. So speaking on his behalf, I don't think he'd want you to feel that way. There's so many ways to answer that, actually. It's a wonderful question, because on one hand, we would all want to instinctively say, well, of course, we're not all attracted to the same type of person. And that, again, that's liberty before the Lord, that we all find certain things really attractive. I mean, I think about that in nature. So excuse me if we're resorting to nature, but there's something about creation that comes out as well. I love the platypus. I think the platypus is the most coolest animal in the world, and it's this big, dumpy, fat animal that floats around the water. What's attractive? I don't know. It's just maybe that's why I like it so much. I don't know.
You're going to get a pet platypus
I get
soon.
platypus, which will not surprise some of you. Why can we each have certain things we find attractive in nature and not in nature? Why are there certain things we find attractive in relationships or non-relationships? I can say that with friendships. Sometimes I thoroughly find people that are the exact opposite of me very enjoyable. And sometimes I find them very annoying too, right? So doesn't it just make sense that there is something natural that we can't quantify? Say we all have different preferences. We all have different preferences in lots of different ways. So can I have that preference with what draws me to an individual? Humor, intelligence, career path, being an introvert versus an extrovert. I just think that's part of wiring in the best God-given way. That means we will not always connect with everybody. So that's one way of answering that. The flip side of answering that is, I remember listening to Tim Keller's sermon, and I don't even know if I could tell you the gist of it at this point, but what stood out to me is he made some comment about over the years how he and his wife watched kind of the pecking order of dating in the church, and how very godly people would get maybe overlooked because of appearance. And I thought that was a really, really important point. That we do, I think there's a Western culture that does overemphasize appearance and attraction. So I'm almost sounding like I'm contradicting myself, but to say that there is something about a cultural value there that maybe we put too much weight on, too much pressure on, is probably an important thing to evaluate. So I would never say, well, if you're not attracted to them, you need to pray harder, or you need to find something. But I would say, wow, it's probably a really wise thing to stop and evaluate. Am I too quickly overlooking somebody without taking the time to say, I may be attracted through a different avenue? Like, beauty grows, and you guys know this is true, that you can meet somebody who initially kind of is off-putting to you, but the more you watch them live their life, the more you see them engage, the more you see their kind acts towards others, they become more attractive to you. And that's what we want. We want to see past the outward facade and really see the inward person. And the Lord does warm our hearts towards people that way. So it makes sense even in dating that would be true. Do you want to add anything?
No, that's great.
Okay. Any other thoughts? You keep opening it up.
I have two more questions that have come in here.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it refreshing here. One is, can you recommend a good resource on the topic of body image? The second one is, how do you separate godly bodily stewardship and idolatry? When does exercise and tailored eating become an idol, especially for someone with a history of disordered eating?
All right, let me answer that one first. Can you slow the question down again, though?
How do you separate godly bodily stewardship and idolatry? When does exercise and tailored eating become an idol, especially for someone who has a history of disordered eating?
Well, especially when you have a history or a temptation towards it, I'd say I wouldn't really want to rely on your own assessment of it. So that's where the body of Christ is really helpful, where you have one or two trustworthy people to say, I need you to talk to me about this. I need you to constantly probe and push back and make sure that this is rightly ordered. That what is or starts out as good stewardship can easily turn into an obsession, right? And that's true of all of us with hobbies. So anything can be rightly ordered and go to disordered. And there are many things that are disordered that maybe could be reflected in a rightly ordered way. And you're dealing with things we can't get rid of. We can't get food out of our lives, not without shortening it greatly. There's certain things that you just can't go cold turkey, right? And so it does mean I know my heart is prone to wander in this way. I know it's prone to find value and meaning in these things. So here's where I need accountability in my life. And that could be accountability in peer group, a small group, in leadership, in family, in counseling. And so to whatever degree you can provide that for yourself, that will help you measure that.
Yeah.
You want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe the only thing I'd add is that it's just helpful to think about, when we're thinking about stewardship, you keep mentioning liberty is really key, that we have the flexibility to try something and change something. So when you see that there's a rigidity here of how you eat and how much you exercise, that's when it's a good time to question, am I really seeking to be a good steward, or is this becoming something much bigger to me? And even just having people outside of yourself asking you those questions and helping you weigh what you're afraid might happen if you lessen how much you exercise, if you eat certain food or eat a certain amount of food. So it's just good to be mindful of stewardship. Means I get to learn as I go. I get to try things out, and if something is not sustainable or if something's impeding other areas of my life, I might have to change courses. And if you feel like you can't change courses, it's a good time to stop and say, this might be something more than just me trying to be a good steward and to be wise with what God has given me.
Yeah, and just don't do it by yourself. That again is where we should be one anothering each other better and making sure you have the input of people that are really considering what's wise for you is really a helpful thing to do.
Yeah.
What was the other question?
Can you recommend a good resource on the topic of body image? I was about to say, You Were Special is probably my favorite It's a children's book, so probably probably not what you're asking for, but I actually
Yeah,
do.
I'll have you guys all reading children's books.
That's
by then.
right.
There are, and actually I am completely drawing a blank right now, and I do this often, especially with resources. I'm not sure why it is. I think because I start forgetting the names of the books or the titles. But in recent years, there's a lot more coming out that's really helpful. And sometimes when I'm looking for a particular topic, what I'll do is I'll go on a place like christianbook.com, and I might Google in body image, because though not all the books will be good, they all tend to be Christian, strongly Christian, and then I can start sorting through and reading. So unfortunately, I'm at the moment drawing a blank, but those are good avenues to go about. And if you're somebody that really does want a couple good books, I'm happy to have you email me and I'll look them up for you. I think I probably even have a couple on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that is, I'll read one more, and I think that's all we have that have come in. What is the fine, let's see, we might have touched on this, but I'll just read it to make sure. What is the fine boundary between taking care of ourselves, health and body, and grace, and it crossing over into idolatry or sin? I battle with perfectionism and trying to earn acceptance since childhood, even before I was called to faith in Christ. How do I embrace letting that go and embracing weakness and my inability to attain perfection and acceptance of my own standard, instead embrace being strong in Christ through my weakness?
One way I'll answer that is this idea of progressive sanctification, right? That we're growing closer to the Lord, which doesn't mean I'll just shut off these struggles. It means I'll grow in awareness in these struggles. And I'll go back to answering it the same way I did a minute ago, and that's by the body around us. The more we're talking to people and we're able to even sometimes put words to what we're feeling, there's something that happens there that makes me more self-aware, where I can ruminate, I can be struggling with something internally, but I bring it to light, I put it on the table, and all of a sudden it's much more crystal clear, oh, I am finding too much value in this. Or, you know what, I am okay being imperfect here, I am okay with weakness. So there's something about even the ability to engage that conversation out in the open in your own heart, and doing it with others that continue to speak truth, and they're an accurate mirror reflecting back what you need to hear and reflecting truth to you. But I think it's progressive change and maturing and growing in all of us, that we can't just expect that we'll walk away and not struggle anymore with those things. That we're always committing to remembering where our hope is, where our identity is rooted, what God says, what truth has to say about the things around us. I think that's really even relevant for how we speak to young people about it, how we train the next generation, whether it's in mentoring or in youth groups or just in peer mentoring relationships or even in parenting. What does it look like to talk about healthy stewardship of your body, to make healthy choices, to live your life in a way where you care about your appearance, but you're not driven by your appearance? And that's so tricky. I have four teenagers in my house right now, so you all can pray for me. And 2 are boys and 2 are girls. And it's really interesting to see the way I'm talking very differently with all of them, anything from about eating habits to hygiene. And my boys just do not seem to care about hygiene. And so I am overemphasizing sometimes, you know what, if you love people around you, you're going to go take a shower. Could you just, and then I have a son who's visually impaired, and he makes the point, well, what do I care if my hair's sticking up? I can't see it. Well, do you love the people around you? They've got to look at your face and your head. What does it look like? And so we have these comical conversations, but I'm almost exasperated, like, I have to sit next to you. I can smell you 10 feet away. I think that is a I love you well or I don't love you well, so you have to sit next to me kind of mentality. Hygiene, being faithful, taking good care of your body, I don't want to produce that's all they care about, right? Even with eating issues, from a parent standpoint of struggling with, we have daughters who enjoy eating a lot. And teaching them good stewardship without making it about weight or body image is really challenging. And I'm hypersensitive to it, probably because of the counseling I do. And because, and we all know this, that it takes one negative comment from somebody to take you over the ledge, right? One wrong focus. And so having good conversations, even with my girls it's about healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. It's not about size, it's not about weight. And then the Lord gave us two of the scrawniest little boys you could ever imagine. I mean, we adopted them. They were considered failure to thrive. They were so skinny. So what did we repeatedly have the doctor saying to us? Give them more food. Pack on more weight. Let them eat milkshakes. And I'm sitting there going, how am I going to do this when I'm constantly telling my girls they can't have the milkshakes, and I have to tell my boys to have 5 milkshakes, and I'm going to give everybody in my house an eating disorder at the end of the day, right? So learning to balance, what does it look like to talk about healthy eating? And so even these conversations, which I'm sure we do imperfectly, but saying, guys, this is just about being healthy. As a matter of fact, I don't want to put too much emphasis on food in general, except it's nourishment for our bodies. It is fellowship. We try to think of very rich biblical themes with celebration and enjoyment. And we talk in terms of healthy eating. And for these two boys, healthy eating means they need more. The doctor says they need more. And so you're focusing on the right reasons for why food should be limited or food should be maintained in certain ways. And wow, what a tricky thing. And from household to household, the needs and the issues might change. And I think there is a weight of responsibility as adults and as parents to say, I do need to be very careful the way I speak of these things, that it's not out of fear for what my kids will become or look like, but it really is rich principles of healthy, godly living that manage that.
Yeah. Yeah, that just triggered my thinking in the direction of, as parents, it can be really easy to say, do this, do that, or this is what we always do. But we're trying to teach the principle of being wise for the moment and being attentive to, how do we need to grow or what do we need in this season? And so I just think about, as a parent, you're trying to constantly correct your children in one direction or the other, and you can come across as saying, you need to always do this, or this is what's most important. So how do we teach, this isn't a question to you, it's more rhetorical, but how do we recognize that we're all on this journey of learning how to live well and to live before the Lord? And there might be seasons where it's okay to just kind of eat whatever you feel like eating, and there might be seasons where you need to account for what you eat and think about how it affects your body and how you feel and your energy. So just having, again, that flexibility and teaching that flexibility, and that we're on this path of growing in wisdom and responding to kind of the needs that God puts before us today, I think is just really hard to do as parents.
Yeah. A quote, Tim Keller again, in one of his sermons, another thing he said is he used the language, there's a difference between the morally restrained heart and this supernaturally changed heart. And I think that's actually something we're trying to get at, that we can practice moral restraint in our appearance and our eating and whatever it might be, but what we really want is a supernaturally, divinely changed heart that is driven by the things of God. And then we're actually freed from some of those struggles, because it goes back to this, it all flows out of that desire to love God well. And that doesn't, again, it's a part of sanctification. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of growth and change, but it's what's controlling me, who's controlling me, not am I in control. We need self-control. We need stewardship principles. But what we can inadvertently do to ourselves and to the next generation is say, I just have to have enough self-restraint. That's just about enough moral fortitude to do the right thing. And that will always limit us.
Yeah. I have 3 more questions that came in, so okay. I can go to those, or we can...
Yeah, whatever you want.
Okay. How can we overcome or deal with pressure to maintain a beauty standard because it helps us to be treated with more respect on a daily basis?
That is a good one.
Some hard
you
ones
can answer
coming
it.
in. Well, I can answer that? No. Ooh. I don't know how to answer that, but I'll start with just, it's helpful to recognize that we live in a world where beauty matters. And when I first read this, again, I would love to hear more of the story behind it. imagine you and I would both kind of shift our answer based on what's the actual circumstances. Someone being really mistreated or treated unjustly because of their appearance, or is there a way in which how you dress does affect,
Career, jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
things
So,
like that.
across the street at CCEF, we counsel people, and there's a way in which we want our appearance to not be a distraction of the person coming in. So when we have interns who are just starting to counsel, it's just funny to have the conversation about that. Like, you probably don't want to show up in a sweatshirt and sweatpants. It just might be harder for the person, knowing you're an intern to take you seriously. So how can your appearance not hinder your ministry? Kind of that whole being a Jew to the Jews and a Gentile to the Gentiles principle. But at the same time, we have to recognize that, I think as this person is getting at, the world cares about these things, and we have to count the cost of not prioritizing our world the way that the world prioritizes things, and face that might cost us something. But yeah, I'll maybe drop it there and let you pick it up.
Well,
Julie.
so you keep hearing this language of, to what degree does it give us more worth or validate our worth versus when do I build bridges by doing it? And that's what Laura just picked up on. It's kind of like when you go out in the mission field, and missionaries have learned they have to indoctrinate themselves into the culture, they have to embrace it. They begin to dress like people. Is that so they'll be accepted and fit in? On one hand, yes. On one hand, no. It is really to build bridges and to minister to. So when you live in a culture that says dressing professionally, we're picking on that, matters, when do you say, okay, well, I know that doesn't give me more value, but I know if it gives me an equal platform, then when do I use that in ways that help build bridges with people? So there is something about to what degree do we identify and embrace cultural standards, and to what degree do we believe those things dictate our value and worth?
Yeah, and therefore we're going to suffer if we don't just bend to them.
Yeah. And there are people that make decisions to say, you know what, I'll deal with not getting a promotion, or I'll deal with not getting certain jobs because this is remaining true to who I am. And there's something to that as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's just fair to say that this is one way in which we suffer with Christ if we really, if we have these decisions before us and we decide, no, this is really what I feel called to. It's a way in which we suffer with him. It's not overt, oppression necessarily, but maybe it feels that way, or maybe that's the equivalent in our culture. So, yeah. Another question. What are some practical steps you might take in counseling a teenager to see herself with a godly self-image when she struggles?
All right, start that conversation. I'm hesitating because, again, the way it manifests in people's lives is very differently, and this is true with teenagers too. So with teenagers with eating disorders, you're dealing with some more immediate concerns of when do they need medical attention, when do they need some good boundaries with eating habits so that they don't fall off the rails, or questions like that. Then you have teenagers that struggle with the body image issues, the materialism, the social media. And when I say social media, it's driven more by appearance and likes and validation and approval. And you would have a very different conversation then, right? One is health related, and there are other underpinning issues. But the other really is image and wanting to be liked and accepted in the world of others. So there's many avenues you can go. One is thinking through, helping them to see why it's not working for them. And I'll never forget, years ago, I did an experiment with a group of teenagers, and I let them all do a self-portrait of me, which was pretty humbling. So they put out papers on the table. They all were supposed to draw me, and then we were going to put it all around the room. And we did that. We pasted them up all around the room, and they were so radically different. Some because some of them couldn't draw, some because of the way they thought of me. But it was this great kind of teachable moment that I can base my value on what you each think of me, but that's going to change from picture to picture to picture, to go around the room and say, whose image should I base my value off of? And look how precarious that is. Look how that's always a moving target. And one day, the people that think I'm attractive and beautiful for this reason, the next day somebody else doesn't like that about me. And just how finicky and changing that is on a regular basis. So there's something about trying to woo them to understand the corruption of what they're living for. But then here's where you and I often fail, and that is giving them something to aspire to be. And how do we paint an image that they say, I want to leave these mud pies and I want to go to this banquet feast? That's where you and I have to be more compelled to do a better job at wooing them to the gospel, wooing them to the freedom of the ways it liberates me, not because now all of a sudden I can feel good about myself, but because I stop thinking about myself altogether and how freeing that is. And that's time, that's conversation from person to person. It's really interesting. That's why different passages of Scripture connect some people differently. Different metaphors can connect differently. There's all kinds of expressive ways of engaging with teens to get them to think about that. So those are just a few ways of beginning to think about the process. I'm sure we could go on with more. Anything you have to say?
Well, another question just came in, and I was going to piggyback my thoughts off of yours after kind of reading that. We've learned a lot of biblical principles to think about and understand body image today. How can we take what we've learned to help someone who isn't a believer, who would not hold to the same principles? This is in a very particular context where I had the opportunity to unpack these things with someone, but I remember meeting with various teenagers over the years, some of them who didn't have a Christian faith, and just drawing out, like they would come in and say, like, I have self-esteem issues, I just need to believe, kind of like what the Dove commercials are telling me, that that I am beautiful and I need to go through the beautiful door. And I would kind of push back and say, well, it's interesting because I hear you recognize that there's something beautiful about yourself, but that feels really shaky. And it's almost like as long as someone is disagreeing with your view of yourself, or they're treating you in a way that reflects disagreement, you're always going to be questioning. You're always going to be struggling with holding on to that view of yourself. And that's where I would be able to introduce, I think that's because we are relational people. That at the end of the day, we are never meant to be the ones to tell ourselves who we are. We are always meant to receive that identity, that assurance, that foundation outside of ourselves. But then also highlighting, well, what happens when 5 different people in your life have 5 different assessments of you? Who do you trust? And that's where I'd often, this is not all happening within an hour, this is over a long period of time, just starting to say, is it possible that there's somebody who's always right, somebody who's always good, who always sees us rightly? Is it possible that God actually made you, knows who you are, says who you are, and he is trustworthy? And that's been actually an entry point. And typically when people come and meet with me, they know I'm at a Christian counseling center. So even if they aren't a Christian, they know that I might bring that up at some point, or maybe their parents are Christians. So obviously it always depends on what this person knows about you and what they think you might say. So it might be you saying, what I believe is that we always rely on somebody else to tell us who we are. But the good news is that God says good things about us, or says things to us that are good news. That even when we are broken, even when we do things that we hate, that's not the end of our story, that's not the end of our identity. So I think one entry point for unbelievers is helping them to recognize at the end of the day, they can't rely on themselves completely, and they can't rely on other people in their lives. So who do we trust? And can we grapple with the fact that we're always looking at some mirror? It's just, what mirror are we looking at? So any other thoughts on how to share these things with an unbeliever?
Well, yeah, I think that's where the best of the Dove commercials or the documentaries, Killing Us Softly, they're wooing women over to the corruption of buying into that philosophy. So it's possible to say these things because there's just clarity that these things aren't meant to satisfy. And so women can be convinced of that, young girls can be convinced of that in ways that are void of God. But then the question does come down to, well, what am I going to find my identity in? And the best the world has to offer then is, I'm just going to feel good about myself, or I'm just going to call myself beautiful. So, going back to the picture of the doors, what do you do when a really unattractive person says, well, I'm going to see myself as beautiful? There's something inspiring about that, right? But I also would say, but is there something accurate about that? And that's purely a shallow, physical judgment. And so the question is, well, do you redefine beauty and what we see as beautiful in a non-Christian way? How do we make sense out of all of that? Where, again, it goes back to what I said earlier, that the world has the attractive and the unattractive. The world has the successful and not successful. The world has this human exchange where not everybody is equal in every way. And the issue there is, even if somebody is unattractive, their value is not found in that, right? And so how do you talk about that in ways that are helpful, not harmful? How do you engage in ways that it actually opens the door to say, there's got to be something or someone that can redefine this in a way that makes sense to me? So I'm probably throwing out more questions and complexities than I am help. But I think because we should really struggle that we're not too quick in how we define beauty, and that we do redefine that everything does point back to a creator. But now how are we winsome in the ways we move towards non-Christians, that we talk about it in helpful ways? And the language we use sometimes is by helping them see the corruption of it, and then praying that the way we live our lives will help them see what it's created to be, and it will move them, it will woo them to want to have a reason for the hope we have.
Yeah. We have more questions coming in, so
Okay.
you are stirring up more questions. This one you and I actually chatted about briefly over lunch, but when we give and receive compliments such as, I like your hair, or you look beautiful today, many times we are genuinely appreciating God's gift of beauty to that person, but sometimes it's just superficial and unhelpful, and the message is not biblical. How should we view how our compliments shape our values in this way? How do we praise the beauty of each other intentionally and biblically? We talked about it, not that we came
we
up with
didn't
the best
resolve it, we
answer
just
for
talked
it,
about
but,
it. How do I want to answer that? I'll start by a semi-humorous story. I'm really sensitive to this as a parent, and that's really sharpened me how to think about it, where, of course, I want to compliment my children. But I'm very careful that I don't compliment them only on their appearance, or only on their successes, by the way. It's finding lots of ways to affirm them in helpful ways. And so when they happen to look nice, should I not tell them they look nice because I'm afraid they'll put all of their value in their appearance? No. There's something about giving praise where praise is due, or somebody does a good job singing or presenting something or whatever it might be, where it's a rightly ordered compliment that is rightly ordered and good, and we should be doing that for one another. But the danger that you're pointing out is when we're making people feel good by outward appearance, or that's all we have to offer. And I think that's fair as well to have that concern. So I can remember, especially when my kids were younger, being very proactive in talking about issues of appearance and body image issues, and not necessarily advocating this, but I can remember there was a time where we were in King of Prussia Mall, and my guys were all under the age of 12 at this time. And if you've ever been in the King of Prussia Mall and you've passed by the Victoria's Secret store, you know you can't miss it. And it's these huge pictures, images of women in their underwear as you go by. And so I'm with my husband and my kids, and we're walking through, and we got to the Victoria's Secret store, and I stopped everybody. And I said, guys, I want you to tell me, what do you think about these images? And my husband's like this, because he knows me well. Here we are standing, we've got a baby in our hands, and we've got younger kids, and he's just shaking his head because he knows me well enough to know that there's several things families do. They will rush their kids past really fast. They'll tell them to put their eyes up, or they'll yell at them for glancing over at it. And again, I've got teenage boys now. Might I do it a little differently now? Maybe. But at the time, it seemed like a good idea. And I was standing there going, guys, this is what people think will sell. They think you'll go in there and buy their underwear if they're dressed like that. And just having this conversation of saying, I want to put out there that there's a cultural value system that they're being flooded by, and I want to be reinterpreting it for them rather than just silent. And that's my concern, the silence on the matter, rather than us saying, you look really nice today. And what? Or but don't find your value in that, by the way. And I walk away, like, that's not a compliment either. Years ago, my daughter went with an appointment with me. I was probably at the dentist's office or something. And as I came out, she was sitting there looking at magazines, and she put one down, and I saw it was probably similar to a Victoria's Secret catalog. And I was kind of concerned. I'm like, was she sitting there looking at this the whole time? And as I was trying to debate whether I should ask her or not, she said something about it. And I go, were you looking at that, Brittany? She goes, yeah. And so I'm sitting there trying to formulate, well, what should I say? Should I be concerned? And as I'm thinking about it, Brittany goes, yeah, I think, Mom, that model looks just like you. Oh, it does? Oh, thank you.
Conversation went a totally different
There's a compliment going reverse. Oh, well, good. I'm glad that's what you got from that. There's where you got to stop. I could have been like thrown off. I was for a split second, and go, well, what do you think about those magazines? And she's off talking about how pretty one thing was versus another, and having this very natural conversation of going, this is what media does. It sells things. And how do you think about it? How are you processing it? And isn't that true even with the compliments we give each other, that we're always nurturing something? And that's why I like these C.S. Lewis quotes I've thrown out today, that in what destination am I moving somebody towards? And can there be a rightly ordered value in appearance? Of course, I think we would say there can be. But we live in a culture that obsesses over it. And that's what makes it so hard to even have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, when I read this question, I had this convicting moment. It's one of these thoughts that's been in the back of my mind for a while, but now I'm going to draw it out in front of a crowd of 100 people. With my own children, they're ages 2 and 4, I'll just find that, like, when I'm kind of passing through, like I'm getting ready for work, or I'm just having these quick engagements with them before I leave, I've noticed myself being drawn to things like their appearance, or like, oh, you look so cute in that, or, you're so pretty, all the things that I've like trained myself never to say to my children, or not only to say. And I've just found that, like, what's going on in that moment, I think sometimes I just don't know what to say. And so I say the things that are, easy, accessible, that they're true. Like, I genuinely love the way my children look, and I'm drawn to their appearance. But I think what this question is highlighting is, how do our compliments, highlight our values? That's not the only thing I value in my kids. But maybe the problem in that moment is that I just don't even know what to say, or I'm not tapping into the depth of who they are. And I don't think that we always even have to make comments about other people. Maybe we can just be better at asking questions. So when we see somebody, as opposed to saying, oh, I like this, or complimenting them, asking a good question that helps you to know them and helps you to see their depth and the things that are admirable and worthy about them at a deeper level. So I'd say that part of the complimenting, some of it might be appeasing, or we want them to think well of us, but some of it, I think, is just our relationships can lack depth, and we can just not know people well. And so I think it's just this is a good opportunity to think about, how do we affirm each other, not just by saying things that make conversations feel happy and smooth, but how do we ask questions that help us to know people?
Yeah, another way, as you're talking about your children, it just thinks, I want my children to know I just delight in them. Mm-hmm. Not delight in particular parts of them, but I just delight in being with them. So one of the things they'll regularly hear me say, even when they're driving me crazy, is, guys, I'd rather be with you than anybody else in the world. Mm-hmm. Even on a bad day when you're driving me insane, I'd rather be with you. Why? Because I love you. I delight in you. And there's nothing you're doing to earn it. As a matter of fact, I'm taking probably the worst moment to say that. And there's something really rich about saying, you are not earning my love or my approval or my admiration because of your appearance, because of your grades, because of your success. Isn't that how you and I should make each other feel too? That we just delight in being with somebody. You know when it's just fun to be around somebody? It's just enjoyable, and they're not doing anything great. They're just enjoyable to be around, and that we would have that impact on one another, that we delight in each other simply because we can enjoy the fact that God has created us differently, which means I'll give a compliment, and it'll be just a really sweet compliment. But it's not because I find pleasure in being around somebody I think's important and makes me feel important, or somebody who's attractive so I feel attractive, or someone successful so I feel successful, that it really is a delight in just who the person is. So that's the language that comes to mind, is any compliment I give goes beyond just the compliment of the moment, but I'm demonstrating I delight in the person.
Yeah. So maybe we can say things that don't go over as smoothly, but actually reflect our heart, such as, it's really good to see you, and I just enjoy being with you, as opposed to like, your hair just looks really nice today. So, and maybe it's fair to say it's not.
I would hope Laura would come into work and tell me I look nice once in a while. But if all I ever saw of Laura at work was her complimenting me on an outfit or my hair or something, after a while, that would start to rub me the wrong way, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it rub you the wrong way to think, why is she always commenting on my looks?
That's why I'm the challenging coworker, right?
So we all know that there is a level where all of a sudden it is what somebody finds value in you, rather than just a moment of a nice compliment.
Yeah, that's right. I have like one or two more questions, but what's our time, Karen?
I think we have time for one or two more.
You have time? Okay, great. I'm up here and it's just very bright, and I don't quite know when we're supposed to start or stop. All right, when I am stressed, I want to go to food, but I'm also really worried about my body shape. What's the connection between the two almost contradictions?
All right, let's start talking that out. So it's where we find comfort, right? In moments of anxiety and stress and pressure, what do I turn to for comfort is really where my mind goes to right away. That can be food, that can be escape, it can be a book, it can be a relationship. And so that would be the greater concern, that when pressure mounts my life, where do I go for refuge? Where do I go for reprieve? Where do I go to start feeling good? And that shouldn't be food. That's us taking something really God created and good and using it as a source of refuge that was never meant to be a source of refuge. So that's one way of answering it.
Yeah. Actually, it reminded me of a funny story. Years ago, when my husband and I were students here at Westminster, we actually got the snack room here started up. And it was just funny. It was almost a social experiment to see students interact with this wall of snacks. And one day, one of our close friends walked in there in between classes and just stared up at the shelves of food. And he goes, "What will make me happy?" And it was like, that is exactly that is exactly the question that's often in our mind. When we go to food or when I turn to food. And I feel like just hearing that out loud was just helpful, because now I have that question in my mind when I open the fridge, and it's not, same thing with appearance. It's not a bad thing to enjoy food. It's not even a bad thing to receive comfort from food. It's if we lean on food for comfort, and if we aren't taking care of ourselves in the process. Those are the questions that we have to wrestle with and adjust, our course. So I think that's. We're talking about two different struggles here of maybe looking to food to do more than it can for us, and the other would be, just skipped off this question. Do you want to unpack the worried about body shape piece? I feel like you've already kind of talked about that today.
Yeah, it's hard to know without being asked specifically what they mean by that, but. When should I care if I'm gaining weight? When should I? That's just so tricky, because I feel like value is so connected to those things versus just healthy living or healthy eating. I think exercise the same way. When I go through phases of not exercising or engaging in things I know will make me feel healthier or more rested, But it really is out of the motive of not feeling myself or being in good health or wanting good stewardship versus I'm feeling bad about myself. So it's just a tricky, it feels like we can put rules on those things, but then we miss really understanding what drives our behavior.
Yeah.
So one more question.
Yeah. Let's see. How can we model healthy body image to girls who aren't our children? Students in a public school, girls in the youth group, etc. How do we address those issues, particularly if it's a really not great time to have a sit-down conversation? Class time, middle of a lesson, public social situation, etc.
I love that question. That's a great, not that I didn't love the other questions, by the way. I love that question because that really should be what we're asking, even of each other. But again, with the younger generations, so we look at mothers, daughters, like we saw in the Dove video. But I really think we need to do a far better job of this with each other. So even imagine sitting around having lunch or dinner together with a group of friends and how the conversation can turn quickly to, oh, I just ate too much over Christmas and all the junk food I ate, and now I really just got to get myself back in shape. And how those conversations, whether you're feeling okay about the conversation you're having or not, how that's influencing maybe 3 other people around the table. And how your focus on food or weight or appearance, whether it's rightly ordered for you or not, can also shape people around us. So you take mothers in this video who had no clue their daughters would say the things they'd say, but it leaked out. And that's maybe that's the picture I want, the leaking out of values or the leaking out of influence that you and I don't often think about. So especially with the younger generation and in youth groups, first of all, it's me modeling. In some ways, it might mean what I model is the girls never hear me speak negatively about my body. They hear whether I'm struggling or not internally. Maybe my struggle goes to 1 or 2 good accountability partners, but with younger people I'm mentoring or influencing, I want to make sure they hear we're not defined by the size of our bodies or the size of our clothes or whether you wear makeup or don't wear makeup. But what they hear the conversation being is, does who you are reflect back to the Creator? That's great that you love to dress that way, but does that reflect back to the Lord? Or that's really great that you enjoy listening to that music. Do you think that reflects back to the Lord? Is there a way that my conversations with the younger generation sharpen them to say, you have creative liberty? I don't want to limit them either. But how does conversations about modesty, which we can be really good about having, how does conversations about sexuality, how does conversations about parents say, there's a lot of freedom here, but what motivates you? And does it point back to your Creator? And even those conversations are foreign with young people, and you're probably going to have to work hard at getting to the point they understand what you're asking with that. But it's all about modeling in those moments. It's all about the conversations I choose to have or not have. It might even be about not being aware that when I take girls out to, or I take the youth group out to Dairy Queen, that they're watching what I eat or don't eat on a regular basis. And so are they always watching me deprive myself? Or are they watching me enjoy something in a rightly ordered way? Are they watching me overindulge in something? That for good or ill, I'm realizing I'm in a role where I am being watched. And I want to make sure that I am modeling to them what healthy lifestyle looks like.
Yeah.
So again, I know we can probably get more specific with that, but I'll throw it back to you for any last thoughts.
Yeah, I think the previous discussion we had about even how we complement each other, how we engage in small talk, I think can have a lot of influence. So behavior, attitudes, small talk, things that kind of leak out of us that we think are throwaway comments or reactions. Yeah, they actually do shape the people around us. So just taking stock of those things, being mindful of them and thinking, what might need to shift and how can I pray toward that end and even seek help to grow in those ways. So, yeah.
Good. Karen,
right.
should we pass it on to you to close?